June 14th, 2019. The Ashford Hotel, Manhattan. 200 of New York's elite watched in frozen horror as Ethan Caldwell, tech entrepreneur, millionaire groom, raised his hand and slapped his own mother across the face. The sound echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. His mother, Pearl Caldwell, stood there in her thrift store dress, her cheek burning red, tears streaming down her face. She whispered just 4 words that everyone heard in the deadly silence. "I'm so proud of you." Then she turned and walked out. Alone. What Ethan didn't know was that he had less than 12 hours left to be the person he thought he was. Because by morning, everything would change. But to understand why this moment destroyed him, you need to know the woman he just humiliated. You need to know Pearl Caldwell. And you need to understand how a mother's unconditional love became her son's greatest shame. This is a story about sacrifice, about ambition, about the invisible people we leave behind when we climb toward success. And it's a story about regret so crushing, so absolute, that it follows you for the rest of your life. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and we read every comment on our videos. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Rewind to 3 hours earlier. Pearl Caldwell arrives at the Ashford Hotel alone, clutching a small purse. She's wearing the nicest dress she owns, bought from a thrift store and altered by hand, the stitching careful and precise because she'd learned to sew as a girl and never forgot. No corsage pinned to her chest. No special seating. No escort to walk her through the marble lobby with its crystal chandeliers and its guests who smelled like old money and new ambition. The event coordinator, a young woman with a clipboard and an earpiece, mistakes her for catering staff, points her toward the service entrance. This is Ethan's mother, the woman who raised him single-handedly in a 2-bedroom apartment in the Bronx after his father walked out when Ethan was 3. The woman who worked 3 jobs, waitressing at a diner during breakfast and lunch shifts, cleaning office buildings at night, and doing ironing for neighbors on weekends, so her son could have tutors, could have books, could have a chance at something better. She's seated at table 16. In the back, near the kitchen doors where waiters rush past with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that cost more than her monthly rent. She's surrounded by distant relatives Ethan barely knows, a cousin he hasn't spoken to in a decade, an uncle who didn't raise him, people invited out of obligation, not love. His new wife, Vanessa Harrington, daughter of real estate moguls whose names appeared in the society pages, whose family had a wing at the Met, has her entire family at the front. Her mother wears diamonds that cost more than Pearl made in 5 years. Her father wears a watch that cost more than Pearl made in 10. Ethan planned the seating chart himself. He agonized over it for weeks, moving names around like chess pieces, trying to minimize the possibility that anyone important would ask about the small, quiet woman at the back table wearing a dress that didn't quite fit the evening's black tie elegance. Table 16 wasn't an accident. It was a choice. Pearl wasn't always invisible to her son. There was a time, and she remembered it with the kind of clarity that comes from replaying precious moments over and over, when Ethan was everything to her, and she was everything to him. She remembered the way young Ethan would come home from school, backpack slung over one shoulder, and she'd be waiting at their tiny kitchen table, exhausted from double shifts at the diner, her feet swollen in her practical shoes, but smiling. Always smiling. She'd ask about his day, and he'd tell her everything. Every test, every friend, every worry. She'd iron his school clothes at night while he slept, the steam rising in their small apartment, the iron hissing against fabric she'd washed by hand because the laundromat cost too much. She'd wake up at 5 a.m. to pack his lunch. Never fancy, but always made with love. A sandwich, an apple, a note tucked inside that said, "You're going to do great things." She'd walk him to the subway even when her feet ached from standing all day, even when the winter cold bit through her thin coat, because those 15 minutes together were hers, and she wasn't giving them up. When Ethan got accepted to Pemberton Academy, one of the most prestigious boarding schools in the country, the kind of place where senators sent their children, where old money sent their heirs, Pearl cried for 3 days straight. Good tears, she told him. Happy tears. Proud tears. Tears that said, "We did it. You're going somewhere I never could." She couldn't afford to buy him a proper graduation gift when he left for Pemberton. Her bank account had $53 in it after paying for his uniforms, his books, his train ticket to Connecticut. So she went to a thrift store on a rainy Tuesday afternoon and found a leather briefcase tucked between old coats and broken lamps. It was scuffed and worn, the handle slightly frayed, but she saw something in it. Potential. History. A second life. She took it home and cleaned it for hours, conditioning the leather until it shined, polishing the brass clasps until they gleamed. Inside, she tucked a note written on a folded napkin from the diner where she worked, her handwriting careful and deliberate. Never forget who you are. You didn't just survive. You thrived. Happy always survive in penthouses. The last line was a little joke between them. Ethan had once asked her when he was 8 years old, "Mom, do you think happy people live in penthouses?" And she'd laughed and told him, "Happy people live everywhere, baby. Even here." Ethan kept that briefcase through 4 years at Pemberton, through his years at Stanford, where he majored in computer science and minored in ambition, through his first startup, a tech company that failed spectacularly but taught him everything he needed to know about resilience, through his second startup, the one that made him a millionaire before he turned 30. But somewhere along the way, he stopped opening the briefcase, stopped reading the note, stopped calling his mother every Sunday like he used to, started forgetting where he came from, or maybe just wishing he could. At Pemberton, Ethan learned quickly that his background was a liability, something to be hidden rather than celebrated. While his classmates talked casually about summer homes in the Hamptons, about skiing in Aspen, about their father's hedge funds and their mother's charity galas, Ethan stayed silent about his bedroom in the Bronx, about the roaches he'd sometimes find in the kitchen, about the way his mother counted pennies at the grocery store. When they complained about their drivers being late, about their housekeepers folding their clothes wrong, about their trust funds not kicking in until they turned 25, he said nothing about his mother taking 3 buses to visit him on weekends, arriving exhausted but smiling, bringing him homemade cookies wrapped in tinfoil because she couldn't afford the fancy care packages other parents sent. He started lying. Small lies at first, then bigger ones. He told people his parents were overseas when someone asked why they never saw them at Parents' Weekend. He said he was raised by a distant aunt who preferred her privacy. He created a fictional backstory that was vague enough to be believable, polished enough to pass inspection. By the time he met Vanessa Harrington at a tech conference in San Francisco, she was there representing her family's real estate investment arm. He was there pitching his second startup. Pearl had become a secret he kept locked away in a part of his life he no longer visited. A part he'd outgrown. Or so he told himself. He'd visit Pearl maybe twice a year. Never brought friends. Never brought colleagues. Never brought Vanessa, even after they'd been dating for 6 months, even after they'd gotten engaged. He sent money, generous amounts that Pearl never asked for and barely spent, putting most of it away for emergencies. But money was easy. Money didn't require presence. Money didn't require him to explain where he came from. When Vanessa asked to meet his family before the wedding, her voice gentle but persistent, Ethan panicked. He couldn't hide Pearl forever, but he could minimize her. Control the narrative. Keep her at arm's length and hope nobody looked too closely. "My mother's simple," he told Vanessa one night over dinner at a restaurant where the wine cost more than Pearl's weekly grocery budget. "She won't really fit in with your family. She's not. She's not sophisticated. Maybe it's better if she just attends quietly. Low profile. You understand." Vanessa, to her credit, looked uncomfortable. She set down her wine glass and studied him, and for a moment Ethan thought she might push back, might insist on meeting the woman who raised him. But she didn't. She just nodded and said, "If that's what you think is best." And Ethan exhaled, relieved, not realizing that this moment, this small betrayal, was just the beginning. Now we're back at the reception. Dinner is finished. A 7-course meal that Pearl barely touched because she felt out of place, because the couple next to her kept talking about their yacht like everyone at the table owned yachts, because the silverware was confusing and she didn't want to use the wrong fork. Speeches are about to begin. Vanessa's father has just finished a toast about welcoming Ethan into the family, and people are applauding politely, their champagne glasses catching the light from the massive chandelier overhead. Pearl does something Ethan explicitly told her not to do. She stands up from table 16 and walks toward the front of the ballroom, weaving between tables of strangers who glance at her curiously. She's holding a small gift, wrapped in newspaper because she couldn't afford wrapping paper, because she'd spent what little money she had on the thrift store dress and the train ticket to Manhattan. Inside the newspaper is a photo album she made by hand. Pictures of Ethan as a boy, his first day of school with his gap-toothed smile, his middle school graduation where he'd given a speech and she'd cried in the audience, his acceptance letter to Pemberton that they'd celebrated with pizza from the corner shop. Every milestone she'd witnessed alone, documented and preserved because memory was all she had. She just wants to give it to him, to hug him, to tell him she loves him in front of all these people who matter to him now, to claim her place in his life the way a mother should. Ethan sees her coming. His face goes white, then red. Vanessa's mother is watching from table 1. Her father is watching. His investors are watching. Everyone is watching as this small, out-of-place woman approaches the head table with her newspaper-wrapped gift and her hopeful smile. Pearl reaches the head table, her hands trembling slightly. "Ethan, honey, I just wanted to." "What are you doing?" His voice is cold, sharp, nothing like the boy who used to hug her goodbye at the subway station. "I brought you something. I made you a... I told you to stay at your table." The ballroom goes quiet. Conversations stop mid-sentence. People turn to watch. The band, which had been setting up for the next dance, pauses uncertainly. Pearl's smile falters. "I know, baby. I just thought on your wedding day." "You're embarrassing me." The words hang in the air like poison. Pearl's eyes fill with tears, but she blinks them back. "Baby, I'm your mother. I just wanted to give you." "I don't care what you want." "Ethan, please." And that's when it happens. Ethan stands. His chair scrapes against the polished floor. His hand shoots out. Fast, angry, unthinking, and the slap cracks across her face like lightning, like thunder, like something breaking that can never be fixed. The entire ballroom gasps. 200 people inhale at once, a collective intake of horror. Pearl touches her cheek. It's already turning red, the outline of her son's fingers visible against her skin. Her eyes fill with tears, but she doesn't cry out, doesn't scream, doesn't collapse, doesn't make the scene worse than it already is. She just looks at her son, this stranger in an expensive tuxedo, this man she doesn't recognize, and her face does something heartbreaking. It softens. The hurt is there, swimming in her eyes, but underneath it is something worse. Understanding. Forgiveness. Love that refuses to die even when it should. She whispers, her voice barely audible but somehow reaching every corner of that silent ballroom. "I'm so proud of you." Then she sets the newspaper-wrapped gift on the table. Gently, carefully, like it's precious even though he doesn't want it. She smooths the newspaper with her hand, a gesture so tender it makes several people look away because they can't watch anymore. Then she turns, and she walks out of the Ashford Hotel alone, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor, her shoulders straight even though everything inside her must be crumbling. Nobody stops her. Not Ethan, who stands frozen at the head table, his hand still raised slightly, his face a mask of anger and shame and something like shock at what he's just done. Not Vanessa, who's staring at her new husband like she's seeing him for the first time and doesn't like what she sees. Not a single guest, not one person in that room full of wealthy, powerful people who could have followed her, who could have said something, who could have done anything. The wedding continues. Awkwardly, quietly, people whisper to each other, their voices hushed and uncomfortable. The band plays, but fewer people dance. The cake is cut, but it tastes like nothing. Ethan and Vanessa smile for the photographer, but the smiles don't reach their eyes. Ethan tells himself he did what he had to do, that she crossed a line, that she embarrassed him in front of everyone who mattered, that he'll apologize later, send more money, smooth things over like he always does, that by next week this will all blow over and everything will go back to normal. He goes to bed that night in his penthouse suite at the Ashford, his new wife beside him but somehow a million miles away, convinced that by morning everything will be fine. He's wrong. Because the next morning, Ethan Caldwell woke up to 12 missed calls on his phone, 4 voicemails, and a text from his aunt, his mother's sister, a woman he hadn't spoken to in 5 years, that made his blood run cold. "Call me immediately. It's about Pearl." He called. His hands shook as he dialed. His aunt answered on the first ring, and her voice was hollow, destroyed, barely holding together. Pearl Caldwell died in her sleep that night. Heart attack. The doctor said it was sudden, painless, that she wouldn't have suffered. She was 56 years old. The last thing she did before bed was frame the photo of Ethan in his tuxedo that someone had texted her from the wedding. The photo from before the slap, when he was still smiling at the altar, when everything still seemed possible. She'd printed it at a 24-hour pharmacy on her way home, paid for a cheap frame, and set it on her nightstand next to the old photos of him as a boy. It was still there when they found her. The newspaper-wrapped photo album, the gift he'd rejected, was on her kitchen table, unopened. She'd brought it home, hadn't thrown it away, hadn't burned it, had just left it there, like maybe someday he'd want it after all. Ethan hung up the phone. Vanessa was asking him what was wrong, her voice worried, her hand on his shoulder, but he couldn't hear her. He couldn't hear anything except his mother's last words to him, echoing in his head like a curse, like a prayer, like something that would follow him for the rest of his life. "I'm so proud of you. So I ask you again, with the full weight of this story behind it, have you ever wondered if the dead can hear us? If they watch from somewhere beyond, waiting for the moment we finally understand what they tried to tell us when they were alive?" Because Ethan Caldwell spent the rest of his life trying to answer that question. He went to Pearl's funeral and broke down at the casket, sobbing so hard he couldn't stand, couldn't breathe, couldn't function. He opened the newspaper-wrapped photo album and saw his entire childhood there, preserved by a woman who had nothing but gave everything. He found the briefcase, the one from the thrift store, in the back of his office closet. Read the napkin note for the first time in years. "Happy always survive in penthouses." And he realized, too late, that she'd been wrong. Happy didn't survive there. Happy died at a table in the back of a hotel ballroom, wrapped in newspaper and rejected by the only person she'd ever lived for. Ethan's marriage to Vanessa lasted 8 months. She left him, and when people asked why, she just said, "You can't build a life with someone who destroys the people who love them." He sold his company, gave most of the money away, tried to pay penance for a sin that couldn't be bought back. But none of it brought her back. None of it changed what he did. None of it answered the question that haunts him every single day. Did she know in that last moment before she died how sorry he'd be? Did she forgive him? Does she hear him now when he talks to her grave every Sunday, telling her all the things he should have said when she was alive? He'll never know. And that's the real punishment. Not grief, which fades. Not guilt, which can be rationalized. But uncertainty. The eternal, unanswerable question of whether the dead can hear us, whether they know, whether they forgive. This is a true story. The names have been changed, but the events are real. Somewhere out there, a man wakes up every day and remembers the moment he slapped his mother. And he'd give everything, every dollar, every success, every achievement, to take it back. But he can't. So let this story be a warning. Let it be a reminder. The people who love us unconditionally, who sacrifice everything for us, who ask for nothing in return, they're not guaranteed to be here tomorrow. They're not waiting forever. They have limits to their hearts, even if they never show them. Don't wait until it's too late to say thank you, to say I'm sorry, to say I love you, because the dead can't hear us. Not really. And that's the cruelest truth of all. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, have you told your mother you love her lately? Because after hearing this story, maybe today's the day. Subscribe so you don't miss our next video. We tell stories that matter, stories that stay with you, stories that change the way you see the world. And remember, some regrets never let you go. Make sure this isn't one of them.